Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin, and we're going to be talking about rebirthing for the next half hour. Our guest is Sandra Ray, who's been involved with the rebirthing technique since 1975, when Leonard Orr first created the process. She's traveled over most of the world teaching rebirthing and is the author of several books, including Celebration of Breath and The Ideal Birth. She is also the founder of the Loving Relationships Training. Before we get into rebirthing, let's talk a little bit about birthing itself. If we define birthing as the physical act of being born, then isn't that act complete in all living people? Why would we need to be rebirthed?
Okay, when we were born, there was a lot of so-called trauma, bright lights, getting spanked on the ass and turned upside down, and, actually just getting out of your mother's womb was difficult. Labor was hard, and there probably was a lot of fear and hurry, and the cord was often cut too soon. And so all these things are stored in the consciousness of a person. I mean, just because you can't right now consciously remember your birth, it is recorded there. And so these memories tend to be very suppressed, and they cause a lot of tension in the body, a lot of strain in the body, and actually the negative thoughts that were formed at that time are stored in the consciousness, and those are creating strange results in a person's life. So we've found that actually remembering one's birth, releasing it from one's consciousness, creates a body that's free of tension and makes a person happier and makes them feel more alive and more energy, since they don't have to suppress all those memories their whole life. And it's proven to be very valuable to find out what thoughts you were thinking at the time of your birth. We do know that pre-verbal thought exists, and babies make very sophisticated decisions about life, about people, and about their bodies at the time of birth or even sooner.
I'm thinking of another situation. Let's say a broken bone.
Mm-hmm.
If you break a bone, the bone can heal, but you really can't unbreak the bone to have it as it was before. What kind of information do we have to suggest that we really can work through that? We can go back and try to remember these pre-verbal thoughts. Now, I think that's a difficult process in and of itself, but how can we really get beyond that? Are we wiping the slate clean?
Oh, actually, the breath itself purifies this. The negativity was taken in on the inhale, and so going back and reconnecting with the prenatal energy through the breath process, and rebirthing is a breathing process, you can actually breathe out on the exhale negative mental mass and negative thoughts that were formed at that time that are stored in the body, and it's like a purification. You actually can release the toxins, the anesthesia, the negative thoughts, the trauma from your consciousness and your cells through this breathing process. So it is a physiological healing also.
Are those children that are being born today in alternative birth centers with Le Boyer methods and Lamaze breathing techniques for the mother, so there's less strain there, natural childbirth, and all the developments that have come about in the last few decades, are they going to be free of the need for rebirthing?
Well, it depends. I mean, it depends on their particular birth, how traumatic it might have been. It was reduced. I'd say that they have reduced trauma, but there might still be some. We're still perfecting these New Age birthing methods. And we do know that Le Boyer's children who were delivered by him, in other words, in the last decade, research shows that they are brighter, they have higher IQs because they had less birth trauma, and they have the ability to be ambidextrous. This is new research we're finding out about these children now. Some of them are 8 and 10 years old. And they have less history of illness. They were less problems as babies, less crying. They seem to be happier, more alert, more alive, more intelligent, and more creative. And so we do know that reducing the birth trauma produces a much healthier, happier, easy-to-raise child. There is that proof. And there is other research now done by Dr. Verney from Toronto, Canada, who's a friend of mine. He's a very wonderful psychologist who has written a book called The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. And it's a very good book that I would recommend that all people read who are considering having a pregnancy and a child, because he talks about prenatal psychology and the effects of what the mother and father think on the fetus inside, during the pregnancy, and it's very well documented research, and it contains in there all the things that we as rebirthers have learned over the years of rebirthing people. So there is this information available to prove scientifically that what we're doing does work.
There is a considerable body of knowledge in the scientific community today and among educators that the primary development of the human being occurs between the time of conception and the age 6, that the first 6 hours are critical, and the first 6 months are critical, and the first 6 years are critical. And after that time, even though we continue to grow and learn, a lot of our personality has already been formed. If you were going to take an adult and put them through a rebirthing experience, hopefully that would be great. As you suggest, they can get the toxins out and they can release some of the negative thoughts and energies that were running around in their body for all those years. But will it really have a positive impact on their personality, which by that time in life has already been formed based on the experiences that they had? You can get the toxins out, but can you really change the personality of the individual?
Oh, yes. The first thought you have to have is that it's safe to change. Sometimes people are afraid to change because birth was a change. They were in liquid, and then they were suddenly hurled into this thing called atmosphere, and that was a very drastic change. It's like taking a fish and throwing them in the water, out of the water in a beach, and expecting them to make it, So a lot of people have fear of change, and so because their first change from a liquid environment to an atmosphere was painful, a lot of people have the thought they don't want to change, they can't change, or change is painful. So first you have to start with the new affirmation that change is safe and that change can be pleasurable, okay? Then you get people willing to change. You have to start with a willingness. And what we've found is that a personality is often based on the thoughts that are formed way in the prenatal period. And so if you change your thoughts, you can literally change. For example, let's say a baby was born who came out a boy, and they wanted a girl child, okay? So this baby boy might have the thought, well, I'm not good enough as a man, you see. And if he has that thought, he grows up, I'm not good enough as a man, then it definitely affects his personality. Okay, so then if he got rebirth, for example, the rebirther would help him change that thought and breathe that thought out and change it to an affirmation, I am good enough as a man. And certainly that would change his whole personality. He would become more radiant, loving, successful, and feel better about himself. And so we've seen remarkable changes and physical changes in people. Also, their looks change, because when you start changing negative thoughts make you ugly. And if you change them to positive thoughts, you actually become more beautiful. And this is one of the pleasures of my job, is when I'm teaching in seminars, I help people all weekend with me to change their thoughts to more and more positive thoughts, and they literally become more beautiful right in front of me. And so that is definitely a change that I can visibly see.
The rebirthing process is obviously longer than something that we could duplicate in a short interview situation, but can you give us some of the specifics of it? Is hypnosis involved?
No, not hypnosis at all. You can remember way back without going into hypnosis. Under hypnosis, you can remember your birth. But this is kind of a process to make you more awake. The way it works is that if I were to rebirth you, I would give you preparation, and I would teach you everything that you need to know to feel safe, okay? And I would help you understand about how birth maybe has affected you and so on. And then I would explain the process to you. And then you would make an appointment, and I would go to your home, or you'd come to my home, or whatever, and you would lie down, and this is done with your clothes on. You could lie on the bed or the floor, and I would teach you how to breathe in this certain way. Now, the breathing is done in the upper chest. It's not yoga breathing in the stomach or anything like that. It's breathing up here, because the damage done to the breath mechanism at birth needs to be healed up here in this area. So I would have you start breathing in a specified way, which would be pulling on the inhale, relaxing on the exhale in a circular rhythm, and in the upper chest. And I would guide your breathing in that way and keep you breathing in that way for about an hour. And when you breathe in that way, in the presence of a rebirther, this is not to be done alone at the beginning. When you breathe in that way in the presence of a rebirther who has cleared out his or her birth trauma, it has, like, I would say, a vacuum effect, or like it's like a vacuum sweeper. It is drawn out of you up to your consciousness, because you feel safe by looking at me that I did this and I look all right. So then you feel safe to let your birth memories surface, and that's how it works. And then you're breathing along, and breathing in that manner tends to reconnect the person with the prana energy, prenatal energy, and tends to stimulate these memories. Okay, some people don't have birth memories right away; that they have to have several sessions, and we do recommend that you have 10 sessions to get the bulk of the birth material out of the person. And then afterwards, we continue rebirthing as a spiritual purification process to cleanse your whole body, mind, and soul. And so I continue to rebirth myself, even though I've been doing this for 7 years. And the first year, many birth memories surfaced. And then afterwards, less and less surfaced, and I kind of worked it out. And then I started using rebirthing to stay young, healthy, and happy, and purify my consciousness.
Let's talk about some of the specific effects of the process on the individual. One that I'm curious about is the relationship between the individual who goes through rebirthing and their parents. Is there a change in that relationship?
Oh, hopefully, yes, because a person will have more compassion and understanding about what their parents experienced in their life, and they'll realize, for one thing, that one of the problems they had with their parents may have been because their parents had never cleared their own birth, and their parents were always wrestling with that, suppressed stuff and negative thoughts, and so you tend to have more understanding about what your parents have dealt with as beings. You have more forgiveness about the pain at birth. A lot of people have guilt about how they hurt their parents at birth, and so they have to work out that guilt for hurting their mother at delivery and so on. And so that would change your relationship with your mother, working out the guilt. Or some people have anger at their mother because their mother didn't let go at their birth or whatever. And so guilt and anger have affected the relationship with parents. And I just think there's a lot more compassion. I certainly got close to my mother after I started remembering being in her body and getting born through her. And I just came out with a lot more gratitude and appreciation for her.
How do you deal with people, and I hope it hasn't come up a lot, but I assume that it might have, who would say to you, sounds like a lot of hocus pocus to me. Is that one of those wacko California kind of ideas?
Right. I know. I just love California, and I started rebirthing here in San Francisco, and I always get a little hurt when somebody around the country says to me, oh, isn't that California hype? And in fact, I got so not defensive, but protective of the state of California because I was allowed to help develop this wonderful process here in California, that I actually wrote an article in the preface of the revision of Rebirthing in the New Age, which is the book we wrote about rebirthing with Leonard, and I wrote a tribute to California. And I really acknowledge the state of California for being open enough to let us try out some of these way out things. And here we were doing this research in the basement of a Victorian house over in Haight-Ashbury area, and I literally lived in the basement for almost 2 years doing this research. And everybody in California was saying, far out, and now that rebirthing is becoming more accepted all over the country, I just have, quite honestly, a tremendous gratitude to the state of California for being, just letting us do this stuff without any questions. And so that's where I'm coming from. And yes, it did start here, and a lot of people do have the judgment that it's wacky, but I think when they start rebirthing, they forget all those kind of judgments about is it a hype, is it wacky, or whatever, and they just come from real gratitude that they can feel better. That's what people want to do, is feel better. It's my experience. Rebirthing makes you feel better.
What role did Dr. Laboyer have in all of this? Did he help revolutionize the thinking about the birth process?
Yes, about the time that Leonard Orr started discovering rebirthing, and I do acknowledge that he worked on himself in this area 5 to 6 years before he ever tried it on someone else. About the time that he started discovering rebirthing, a man named Dr. Frederick Laboyer was also in France doing research on deliveries, and he revolutionized the way babies are born by creating what we call a quiet birth, leaving the cord attached a long time, giving the baby time to integrate, being outside the mother, leaving the baby on the mother's chest, and then ultimately when the cord was useless, he would cut it later on, and then he put the baby in warm water to give it a pleasurable experience. To me, that was very, wonderful. And about the same time, Dr. Groff in Czechoslovakia was doing research using drugs to stimulate birth memories and sitting with his clients. And so actually these 3 men and a few others around the world were all kind of focusing on birth and birth trauma and how to heal it at about the same time. And I happened to meet Leonard at the beginning of this whole thing here, and I went to Europe and I saw this article in the Vogue magazine by about a man named Dr. Laboye, and I was very excited that somebody else was tuned into what we were doing. So I really was wanting to meet him, and he came here to San Francisco shortly after, and unfortunately we met him right at the beginning of his first tour when he was advertising the book Birth Without Violence, which is a very good book that I recommend also. So it's sort of like we all came together at the same period, and the world was ready to handle this problem. And now, of course, we're doing research on underwater birth that the Russians invented, and they've been doing underwater birth for 20 years, and the public may not know that that's listening, but it is very interesting that some of the rebirthers in my community are experimenting with this and having their babies underwater. My goddaughter was actually born underwater, where the mother and father get in the water together. The baby comes out into the water underwater. And the idea there is that it's used to being in water, which is amniotic fluid, and you put this tub with solution similar to amniotic fluid, and so the baby is coming into an extended womb. And so it's still in liquid, feels comfortable in liquid. It can get used to being outside the mother's body before it has to integrate also the atmosphere at the same time. So that it gets to integrate each stage slowly. And my goddaughter came underwater, and she rested, and she actually meditated, breathing through the cord. And the father held her and checking her heartbeat and everything, and the cord was fine. And so she rested from coming down the birth canal and stayed under the water almost 20 minutes. And then when she was ready to go to the next stage, she just sat up. And it was an incredible birth. We have that all on film. So we are grateful to these people that are trying new ways to prevent birth trauma.
That's neat stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What about, you mentioned the circular breathing, upper part of the respiratory system, not the kind of deep breathing. Yoga is, there are a lot of breathing techniques that are used in different forms of yoga. Meditation practices, Buddhist meditation often revolves around specific breathing techniques. Are there similarities? Is there a common thread that runs through?
Well, all breathing is good. I mean, anything that increases your aliveness is wonderful, okay? So I recommend all processes that work for people. They just have different purposes, you see. And the purpose of rebirthing is to get reconnected to the prana and the prenatal energy, and to heal the damage done to the breath mechanism at birth, which is up here. And so this is why we focus up here, so it has a different purpose. That's the main thing. And people prior to rebirthing tend to, what I would say, be forcing the exhale. They take in very little oxygen. When a typical person breathes, I'm going to exaggerate, they're taking in very little oxygen and they're forcing the exhale, so it's like this, kind of like heavy on the exhale, which makes a person tired. And very little air on the inhale. This is how most people breathe, because their first breath was scary because they were hit and upside down. So most people are afraid to really breathe fully. A rebirther will help you reverse that, and so that you're drawing in a lot of oxygen on the inhale and relaxing on the exhale. So it's sort of like that, and it's just the opposite. And so that healing is done right up here, and so that's the purpose of rebirthing. So each one of these techniques have different purposes, and that's our purpose, is to heal the damage done to this area. So once you start inhaling a lot, and I breathe that way all the time now because I've been rebirthed a lot, and you can't really see it because it's integrated. But by taking so much oxygen in on the inhale naturally every time I breathe, I stay feeling very good, more alive, and more oxygen makes you stay younger, too. A lot of research now we have on that is that doctors found that the more oxygen you take in, the younger you stay, because one theory of old age is that the cells aren't getting enough oxygen and they're withering. So this is why rebirthing also has like a youthing effect on people. It helps them stay young because they're taking in more oxygen.
Sounds very logical. One of the questions that we normally ask on Infinity is, what is the application, or what if we can rate the United States, and in this case, let's even get more specific, California, with other parts of the world. Are there other countries that have been more accepting of the rebirthing process, that are further along? Well, we talked about the Russian underwater birth that's been going on for 20 years, and now some of the hospitals in this country are starting to build and develop facilities for that sort of thing. What about rebirthing? Is it happening elsewhere?
Well, rebirthing, since it started in America, is now just spreading to other countries. And so we spent the first years just rebirthing people in America, and then people, of course, would travel and tell their friends in other countries. Then we started going to Europe. We have done work in London and, also in Switzerland and also in Amsterdam. We've done work and everything. And now we're spreading a lot in Canada. And I've found that it's accepted everywhere. People want this. They intuitively know that this works and it's going to heal them. And it does have a tremendous healing effect on their body. And I found that I don't even have to persuade people. They just want it when they hear about it. They know that there is something going on in their body and mind that is stuck there in that area, and they want it released. And now we're going to Australia, and I've found it very receptive there. Australians really want it. They line up and go for it. And, of course, it's a new young country. They're very eager. I have not found resistance anywhere, to tell you the truth, that I've been. I'm speaking from my experience, and I have been to many countries now, and I've even rebirthed people in India. Totally willing, no resistance. There are some people, of course, that resist it because they have fear. Now, to me, they think it might be scary, but to me, rebirthing isn't scary. It releases the fear that's already stored there. That's one of the purposes of it. And so when people find that out, then they get more willing. So basically, the people that are resistant are just afraid, and so then we help them change their thoughts and get over their fears. And once they try it, they love it.
Is the process ever complete? You talk about the fact that you're still doing it now, and you encourage people to go through about 10 sessions or something like that.
Yeah. Well, each person takes a little bit longer depending on what happened at their birth. Now, if a person had anesthesia, it would take them longer. But we have found that you can get through the bulk of it in 10 sessions, and that we would consider the first part of the completion. Then, after people have 10 sessions, they usually are so in love with it they want to go on. And then we have wet rebirthing also, which is more advanced and more powerful and deeper. And then we even go on to cold water rebirthing. And so what we found is that the first 10 sessions are the first level of completion. And then most people want to go on and go to the other levels because you always just keep feeling better and better. And you clear in more and more thoughts. And so every session is complete in itself. You know what I mean? I could rebirth you once, and then that could be that session complete for you, but we would recommend at least 10 sessions. But my experience is after you have 10 sessions, you want to go on and keep doing it as a purification. It's like you continue meditating because it feels good, right?
Could you lead us through what might be a typical exercise in one of these sessions? You talked a little bit about the first session of reclining and learning a preparation and then the breathing technique. What might you do in a follow-up exercise?
Okay, so each session turns out different based on what the person is clearing at that time. The first session, you would just breathe, and then you would take what you get, what memories you get, and what thoughts come up, and so on, and the rebirther would help you change your negative thoughts, would help you breathe them out, and you might have what we call tingling. Your body might start vibrating and tingling when new aliveness rushes in. When you're breathing out this old negative mass, the new aliveness comes in. And so during the rebirthing session, you might have quite a bit of tingling going on in your body, and energy changes, which is, some people have never felt that much energy in their life. It's amazing. Some people may cry in the session while they're releasing old sadness. They might have a memory of being taken away from their mother at birth, and they release that sadness. And so we encourage people to cry. We say never miss an opportunity to cry. Okay, so there might be emotion, and there might be energy changes. And there'll be a lot of understanding and realizations usually people have. So that would be maybe the first session, and then the second session you come back and you might have a different memory. So you take each time whatever comes out, and it may be different each time. The second time, you might remember your breastfeeding scene. It can go any direction. It doesn't matter. Whatever happens is a perfect thing to happen. And we found that a person will take as much as they can handle. They never let up more than they're ready to handle. And some people say, well, what if it makes you feel crazy? What if I go crazy? See, rebirthing makes you saner, because what makes people crazy is suppressing all this stuff, keeping it suppressed. That makes them feel crazy. And my experience is everybody comes out feeling more sane, more alive, and more happy every time. So each session is different than the session before based on what you're ready to let out next time.
You mentioned something early on that you shouldn't do it on your own, especially in the beginning. You should have a rebirther with you. Is it the kind of, obviously some people are better at guiding other people through a rebirthing session than others. Everyone has their limitations, sort of thing. There's a certain danger in psychotherapy, let's say, of somebody not really being in tune or maybe having a bad day and really messing somebody else up. Is there that concern in rebirthing?
Well, rebirthing is not psychotherapy. It's just breathing. It's a very simple process, and ultimately the person is rebirthing himself, and the rebirther is just there as a breath coach, a guide to keep them breathing, keep them awake, and, listen to them. And so ultimately the person is rebirthing himself. And the way you pick a rebirther is you choose someone you feel really safe with. And you can just tell, you have this list of rebirthers, and you might pick a totally different rebirther than I would, perhaps, based on what you feel comfortable with. And then you go to that rebirther, and then you have this appointment. And so the reason we just say you don't, ultimately, even though you're rebirthing it yourself, we recommend you have someone there as a guide just to keep you going. And also, in case a fear comes up, you can tell your rebirther the thought, and your rebirther will help you change the thought. So it just makes you feel safer to have someone there. And, if you lay down on the street and breathed about an hour, you'd probably get real high, but you might not let these memories surface because you wouldn't feel safe. So the advantage of having a rebirther is there. You feel safe to let this thing come up.
After you go through the rebirthing experience, are you born again?
Depends on how you mean born again, but you do re-choose to live in a new way. So to me, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't want it to be associated with the born again Christian. It's not a religion, but I certainly felt, renewed in my desire to live. That's one of the purposes of it. You do remember that you chose to be here. And sometimes when life gets rough and everything, people's desire to be here gets a little bit shaky. But once you start rebirthing, you kind of re-choose to live. So in that way, you could say reborn. And I certainly feel that my life totally changed because of rebirthing. And as I say, my specialty then was to study how birth affects relationships, which is the research I've been doing. And I can say my relationships totally changed after rebirthing. So my relationships were also reborn and rebirthed.
There was a situation in San Francisco not too long ago. It was called the miracle baby, a baby that was born to a mother that was technically dead. She was on life support systems. And
was that in San Francisco?
Yes, when the child was delivered, and the child is apparently doing fine. That's an extreme example of a very strange way to come into the world. What about some of the other methods of being born, and what impact have you been able to isolate cesarean birth babies?
Oh, yes.
What's different about a cesarean birth baby?
Yeah, incidentally, that happened while I was in India. That incident you're talking about, I was in India, and I don't know all the circumstances, but I would be very interested in following that being and trying to help it clear whatever that death consciousness would affect it. For example, cesarean. Now, those people grow up and tend to have what we call an interruption pattern at times. They start to do something and it gets interrupted because their birth was interrupted. Or they may have the thought that they need to be helped out of things because they had to be helped out of the womb. They didn't get to do it themselves, And some of them are afraid of violence and knives and things like that because, cesarean, there's surgery. Mm-hmm. And so that's the common patterns we've noticed about cesarean. Breech babies who came out backwards sometimes have a fear of hurting people. They grow up and they have the thought, I had to hurt someone in order to survive, because it was more painful to their mother, obviously, if it came out rear end first. So rebirthing a breech person is we try to help them forgive themselves for causing any pain, extra pain, and changing the thought that they need to keep hurting people. Sometimes they think that in order to keep surviving, they have to keep hurting someone. This is what we call a birth script in a person. Mm-hmm. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5 happened, and I survived. So the being grows up thinking it needs to keep doing step 1 to step 2, step 3, step 4, and step 5 in order to keep surviving. So we study a person's birth script that way.
What about a premature baby?
Yes, now that's very interesting, too. We study why did this baby have to come out of the womb early? What was going on? We try to find out what thoughts were going on in the mind of the parents that the baby had to get out early for some reason. We try to study the cause of that and then look at the thoughts around that. Then we found that preemies, not only do we have to rebirth them through the trauma of being premature and those thoughts, we have to rebirth them out of the incubator. And what I mean by that is they tend to grow up with kind of a wall around them because in order to survive, they had to have the shield around them. So they tend to grow up and have a psychic shield around them to protect themselves from the world their whole life. So then we have to help them clear that block they kind of have around them.